Well, hi everyone, and a very warm welcome to this episode of GAIN Meets. My name's Tilly Franklin. I'm one of the founders of GAIN, and I'm also the Chief Investment Officer at the Cambridge University Endowment Fund. But today I'm really excited to be here with our special guest, Pauline Ritter, who's an associate at a very successful private equity firm called Clayton, Dubilier Rice, and looking forward to hearing a bit about what she does and what private equity is all about. But before we do that, Pauline, it would be really great just to get to know you a little bit as a person. So maybe you can just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what kind of things you were sort of into growing up.
Well, first of all, hi everybody, and thank you, Tilly, for welcoming me for this podcast. I'm really excited about this. Um, I'm going to start with the obvious. I am French. You would probably have noticed that in the first minute of the discussion with my accent. But yeah, so I was born in Paris, raised in Paris. I studied in Paris, stayed for the most part of my life in Paris. And what else can I say? I am an engineer by background. Um, I guess what I can say a bit about my younger self is that I was into, I would say, two things when I was younger. And I'm sorry to disappoint, but investing was not part of it. So I guess the first thing I was interested in is improving my ski technique. So I would spend a lot of time in the mountains, but still studying, no worries. And then the second part I was really into is keep on learning as much and for as long as possible. And that is probably why I spent 7 years studying engineering.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, unfortunately, I cannot say that I remember everything. Still.
That's dedication. Well, I think it's actually really great for our audience to hear that you weren't into investing, from an early age, because I think that many people don't find out about it even until a little bit later on. So it would be great to hear about what it was that first sparked your interest in investing and how you found out about this possible career path.
Yeah, as you can see from my background, indeed, nothing predicated that I would end up in an investment job. Yet here I am. Um, I guess I was not born with a specific interest in investing. As a matter of fact, I had literally no clue about what was investment banking or private equity before my early 20s. And it's even worse than that because I think between my teenage ages and like my 20s, um, I absolutely didn't want to work in finance.
Why
And
was that?
the story beyond that is both of my parents work in finance. So my mother is a trader and my father is a portfolio manager. And I remember when I was like quite young, like during dinner, they would have discussion between both of them, very intense discussion, passionate discussion, using like very technical words that I had literally no clue what it was, but still I was really intrigued by what was their job, and I really felt that both my parents were businesswomen and businessmen, and I wanted to become the same as them, basically. I wanted to become them. But what happened is that in 2008, so during the Great Recession, I remember one night they were coming back from work, and I don't know how much the S&P 500 lost on that specific day, but they literally told us, to my brother and my sister and I, do not work in finance. So I think I kept that in mind between as I said, it was 2008, so I was like probably 15 years old, and until my early 20s, I was not working in finance.
So
But
a very
obviously,
negative moment in your memory.
yeah, not on the right basis, of course, because I didn't really know why. But I guess at that age, you kind of listen to your parents. But anyway, so obviously something changed. And what happened is, I think it all started during my last year of engineering studies, when it was finally a question of what job I will have to pick and choose, what career path. And I quickly realized that I actually didn't want to become and work as an engineer. So I started looking at the art of possible. And so I think the first step I had is I was trying to picture the type of work I would like to do. And I was looking for something with enough variety so that I never get bored. And with a constant learning curve so that I keep building up on new knowledge and competencies. So I was still a student, had no clue about what I wanted to do. So I took a gap year. I did 2 internships. The first one in consulting in Paris, and the second one in investment banking in New York. It might have only been because it was New York that I liked
That's
it.
a really good reason.
But the truth is that I absolutely love the experience in investment banking.
And how did you come across those internships, actually? Because a lot of our audience are probably keen to get that type of experience, but it can be hard to come by. Was it through your university?
It was clearly not through my university because, engineering school will not push you to the investment or financing industry. But the rate is that it was, I think, because I was completely lost, I started to talk to a lot of people and with different background, and I started to what we call network, right? And I discussed with some people, and they mentioned the investment banking job. When I was talking about, as I said, the part, I want to have something that has variety and that you keep learning, and someone suggested to try investment banking. So I started looking for opportunities in here.
I see. So you just did your own research, your own networking, reached out to people, and then through that, you kind of came across these opportunities.
Exactly. I would not lie. It was quite tough. It was not an easy task. But
right. So how many times would you say, how many no's did you get before you actually came across one of these internships?
Oh, a lot. And the no was, I think the no came from the fact that obviously I had an engineering background. So I had never had specific classes about accounting or financial analytics and so on. So everything that I had to do was by myself learning from the internet. So I would say the internet saved me because there's a lot of material out there that you can leverage in order to learn by yourself.
Yeah. Well, it's really reassuring again to hear that you didn't have any specific financial knowledge. You just had a, good background with some kind of analytical subject, but you basically did it all by yourself. And then so you were in New York doing this investment banking internship. What happened next?
Yeah. So as I said, I really loved it.
What did you love about it?
I think so. The internship was 6 months, and during 6 months, I had the chance to discover the ins and outs of 3 completely different companies and industries, from the high-tech speed sensors that you have in the army planes in the US to the gaming PCs and electronics, so completely different. And I guess what I like the most is that on each project with the team, we are trying to understand and learn as much as possible in a very short period of time on the company and its financial health, the industry and its key trends. And what was really interesting, and I think that's the first approach I got to investing, is that each time we were running all of this analysis under the prism of question in investing, which is what is that it makes it a good or bad investment. And it became kind of a, I would say, mental, I was not even thinking, how can I say it quite easily? It became an habit to think through. Each time I was looking at materials, reading stuff, making researches, I would always keep the part of my mind this question: what does it make it a good or bad investment? And I actually like this kind of exercise per se.
Okay. So these were companies that you were basically advising as an investment banker, but you were kind of already thinking of almost more like a principal, an investor at that sort of early stage. Yeah. So then how did you get your first full-time job?
Yeah. So what happened is that after my internship, I applied to all kind of graduate programs.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided to go, graduate programs in investment banking.
Mm-hmm.
And then I decided to go to JP Morgan in London.
Mm-hmm.
I spent 3 great years there. I worked with very smart and ambitious people. We advised a lot of different companies from very various industries, and I learned a lot.
Mm-hmm.
What happened is also during these 3 years, I had a bit of more time to understand the ecosystem of this world of finance and its different players.
Mm-hmm.
And I came to the conclusion that as investment bankers, we were giving advices to the private equity funds regarding a potential investment. But at the end of the day, it was only down to them to take the decision to invest, of investing or not. And I guess I felt the urge to understand what it's like to actually invest.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, if I want to kind of summarize what happened, is that I wanted to add a bit more of excitement to my job, in my personal view. So I wanted to keep the good part that I had in investment banking, that is forming a view on a potential company, making all the research and so on. But I also wanted to add the risk related to investing or not. And more than that, I also wanted to have the feeling to be closer to the company itself, as if you are working as a private equity firm, they see you as a potential partner. So the discussion itself, by definition, changes a bit.
I'm sure a lot of our listeners are wondering, how did you make that leap from JP Morgan into your current role at Clayton Dubilier?
So what happened is that in 2021, post COVID, I started to look for opportunities in private equity. And I met the Clayton, Dubilier Rice team in London.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I had heard about this company before because, it's one of the oldest private equity firms.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what triggered my interest is that they have a different approach to investment, so more operational and partnership deals. And taking all of that into account, I was certain I would learn from the best how to become an investor. And here I am. It's been 2 years already at CDNR.
Great.
And I can.
It sounds like.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No.
I was going to say, it sounds like learning is a theme that keeps cropping up in your description about what motivates
Definitely.
you. But I think, we read a lot about private equity and it's a hot topic in finance, but some of the audience might be wondering what actually is private equity, what does it mean, and how is it different from other areas of investing that they might be more familiar with, like investing in public companies?
Okay, so maybe I start with the grammatical definition. If you think about equity is a stake of a company's value. Then if you take public equity, it's a stake in a company that is publicly trading on a stock exchange. So that would be you or me buying a share of Apple, Boeing, or LVMH. And now, if you think about private equity, on the opposite side, it's a stake in a company that is not publicly traded, so a private company. That doesn't.
So you basically have to buy the whole company. You can't just rock up and buy a share in it. You have to buy the whole thing.
Exactly.
So totally. That's a bit more complicated.
No, but it's a very interesting job, and I mean that's the definition. But of course, like what it is more concretely is slightly different, and maybe I can give a bit of an overview of like what it implies because that's probably easier to understand.
Yes,
Um,
please.
but I guess what a private equity fund would typically do is first there's the part of sourcing. So you identify a company that you initially like and have interest in. And then you run all the analysis and due diligence in order to cover every inch of the company and its industry. And that is in order to be 99.9% sure that it's a good investment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when all stars are aligned, then you would buy the company in question with a mix of equity and debt. But once this investment is done, it's actually only, I would say, 1/3 of the work that is completed. Because ultimately what you do is then for a period of 4 to, let's say, 6 years, the private equity fund and the company would work hand in hand in order to help the company in question to grow and identify new opportunities. That would be like expand in new geographies, that would be develop other activities, and so on. And finally, after all these years, well, the private equity fund will sell the company to another investor. And ideally, this company will be much bigger and much better.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that sounds really good. So that sounds like a very sensible thing to do, but there's obviously a huge amount of detail that's involved. So how does that translate into what you do on a more day-to-day basis? Can you give us a bit of a sense of types of activities that you get up to and what you most enjoy about it?
Sure. That's not an easy question, but I think it's interesting because I told you earlier that I was looking for, when I was younger and I was trying to find the right job for me, I wanted some variety. And well, I clearly got it in that job because there is no day that is the same. So at least after 2 years, I've never had a repetitive day. But I can try to give you a sense of what a typical day looks like in this job. And before I do that, I think what is important to mention is that job rely on a team. So you work constantly with your team. It's typically 3 to 5 people working on a deal, like from your firm, with different seniority levels. And as a team, you split the work, but you also circle back all the time to make sure as much information is shared within the group. And so that's key to keep in mind because obviously that's like being able to work with a team and wanting to work with a team is kind of an important part in your decision making. But so to go back to the typical day, I think I can say that the team day would be packed, I would say, with different calls covering a wide range of topics, from talking to the company management about their business plan and how they see the company in 5 years' time, to calling the bank to discuss the option they can offer us to buy the company with some debt. So very different topics, and yet a lot of calls during the day, a lot of exchange.
So it sounds very interactive because some people might think you're kind of chained to a spreadsheet a lot of the time. It sounds like that's not the case for you at all.
Well, I'm not going to lie, because I'm the most junior person, of course, I'm spending a lot of time as well running analysis and doing some modeling on Excel to assess the financial attractiveness of the company. But ultimately, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of interaction with the different parties for the deal.
So you're gathering information from all these sources and then you're feeding it back into your analytical work to kind of figure out the specifics of the plan and how you finance the investment.
That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm. That sounds great.
And of course,
go ahead.
No, I was saying, of course, just to finalize this mention of the teamwork, you spend a lot of time with your team discussing the findings and the next steps, and that's critical in order to be certain that you do a good work and a good analysis, and that you cover everything as a team.
And it sounds like you may have already covered this, but maybe you could just draw out a little bit more specifically what it is that you really enjoy about the job.
Yeah, sure. I think when you mentioned about the point about the fact that it's interactive, that's one of the key parts I like. I actually think that the job of an investor is one, way more dynamic, and second, more people-centered than what it seems. And it is actually what I like the most. And coming back to the dynamic point, there's a lot of interaction, and you're constantly brainstorming, exchanging, and challenging ideas with different people, with your team, but also with your advisor. Indeed, on a deal, you would work with investment bankers, lawyers, consulting firms, who typically provide insights on the industry, but also the financial. Each have their own domain of expertise, and we clearly rely on them to fully grasp everything in relation to the investment. And that I'm quite fond of.
And so it sounds like you yourself are challenging the assumptions. So if you didn't agree with something that was being said or assumptions that were being made, do you have the ability yourself to feed that back and make changes to the plans?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, working on an investment or an investing idea is constantly a work in progress. So along the way, you discover stuff, you refine your opinion. Maybe you can start with thinking it's a good investment and then thinking it's a bad investment, or the other way around. It doesn't look like a good investment, but actually with all the work and research we have done, we see potential in this company, and we think there is clearly a opportunity to create value out of the investment. I think what is the other point I should mention, because it's probably less obvious when you describe the job, and it's actually quite key for me, is the fact that it's very people-centered. And the reason why is that ultimately the potential investment that you look at is a company. And it's primarily defined by its people, its management, who are actually running the business on a day-to-day basis. And these people are the ones you will be working with for the duration of the investment. And it's absolutely thrilling, I would say, to have the opportunity to work with and learn from all these different people.
Right. I mean, it's really interesting because I think a lot of people get the impression that investing is quite sort of cut and dried. It's very numerical. It's very financial. But what I'm hearing from you is it's actually much more of an art than a science. There's a lot of relationships involved. There's a lot of judgments involved. There's a lot of back and forth and sort of changing assumptions as the deal progresses. It sounds like that's part of it that you find really rewarding.
Exactly. That's completely right. That's what I like the most. I'm not gonna lie, I also like the analytical part, and it does exist, and it's also very important.
Yes.
But ultimately, that's probably not the part that I'm the most interested in.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Great. Well, maybe we can change tack a little bit and hear about sort of what advice you've received along the way that helped you either to decide what you wanted to do or to actually get, this role, which sounds fascinating. What's the best piece of advice that you've received that you can share with our listeners?
Um, well, someone, okay, that's very personal, but someone told me once, um, you are the captain of your ship and the master of your life. And I guess at that time it was more like a lifestyle advice rather than a career one. But I guess it's also resonated to me when making career decisions. The way I applied it, and I think it's a fairly good approach, at least it was for me, is that first, you need to know yourself. And by that, it means that you need to be conscious of what you like and do not like, and more importantly, understand in which working environment you want to evolve and grow. And for me, it translated into looking for a job that brings variety and learning together while being surrounded by people I admire and enjoy working with. The second advice, and I think that was the most difficult one, is to trust yourself, and you need to try. You need to fail and you need to retry. And I think by doing that, you definitely have more chance to end up exactly where you need to be.
It sounds like you put that into action when you got all those rejections from applying for internships, but you just kept going and going and going, and eventually you found something that sounds like it was a huge learning experience for you.
Exactly, completely. It's exactly what happened to me actually, with like starting from an engineering background, realizing it was not for me, then trying like consulting, liking it, but not that sure, trying investment banking, loving New York, loving investment banking, and then going down that route, and then from investment banking realizing that there were other opportunities that were better suited for me, i.e. private equity. That's a bit of like the trip I took, basically.
And maybe rather than thinking about advice you received from others, if you were kind of looking back at yourself finishing up your engineering degree at university, what else would you say to your younger self in terms of advice, which could be very relevant to the GAIN audience, many of whom are studying at the moment?
I think the advice I would give is, although it's not very easy to do, I think networking is really helpful, because talking to people who can share their experience, their own insights, and maybe help you along down the road to enter a new position, I think it's quite a good approach, actually.
And how do you go about that? I mean, how do you start building your network when you're a young person who's very early in their journey?
That's not an easy task, and I think looking back at it, when I was working in engineering, like when I was in my engineer school back in France, they were really not good at that, in a sense, like trying to help building the network. And I think nowadays schools are trying to help students to see like the out of possible, the variety of jobs that they can do, and that probably might be through, let's say, association as like GAIN. What you're doing is quite helpful, right? And then that would be also going through LinkedIn and looking at profile, reaching out to people. I'm not gonna lie, probably there's a bunch of people who will never answer you, but some will, and usually these people are willing to help, and that's genuine help.
So you literally sort of reached out to people, sort of cold call people, as it were, through LinkedIn or other media, and even though the majority just ignored it, some of them actually did get back to you and offered you their advice or their time. That's amazing. Yeah.
I didn't measure the conversion ratio of the people, of those people, but I can assure you it was very low.
But it wasn't zero. That's the most important
It
thing.
wasn't zero.
Yeah, it's probably better that we don't measure that, but because but it is a really important point that that people are very busy, and just because somebody doesn't get back to you, it doesn't mean that the next person's not going to get back to you.
I think that
Great.
just to add on that, I think what can be helpful there is when you look at profile or try to reach out to people, it's always easier if you choose someone who down the road went to the same school, would it be high school or whatsoever. I mean, it creates already a kind of a link, and people feel a bit more, I would not say obliged, but maybe more inclined to reply to you.
Yeah, like went to the same university or studied the same subject or comes from the same town or anything, some link. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners today, Pauline?
Nothing else. But if you allow me, I would like to ask you a question in return.
Sure.
I guess I can return you the question. What would you tell me? What advice you would give me now, today, for the future of my career? Because ultimately, I've been working for 5 years now, so I still have a long road to go through.
Sure. Well, I think the advice that I would give to people in general is, and it probably perhaps doesn't apply to you so much because it sounds like you're really loving what you're doing at the moment, which is fantastic, but it's not to stress out about the long term, in the sense that people may not know exactly what they want to do in their career. But it doesn't really matter, in the sense that it's just important to find something and to do something, because that's the way that you learn about yourself and you learn about what type of opportunities are out there. And people have often said to me, when did you kind of decide you wanted to be a CIO or something? And it was pretty much the day before I applied for the job. I didn't really have a long-term career ambition. I see it more as an evolutionary process to sort of go through one's career, accumulating experience, and then on the basis of that, kind of seeing what comes next. So that would be one thing that I would say. I think another point is there are always going to be kind of highs and lows. I think especially in investing, it's a very absorbing career, and we get kind of tied up in what we're doing to some extent. And obviously, if an investment goes really well, it's very exhilarating, but they don't always go really well. But I think another piece of advice would be not to sweat it too much. Everybody makes mistakes, and it's okay to make mistakes. Obviously, we want to avoid making unnecessary mistakes, but funnily enough, I've actually learned the most from things that didn't go as planned, because I think if you plan something and it just goes as planned and then it's the end, you learned everything that you needed to know at the beginning, and you didn't kind of learn as much along the way. So really embracing the challenges and the things that don't go well, and sticking with it, and sort of seeing it as a very long-term endeavor, I think would be the other thing that I would say. And also to have fun. I was listening to a podcast with another leading investor the other day, and they said, the most important thing that they'd learned was to have a sense of humor. And I think that was really a really good piece of advice that I took, actually, that it's supposed to be fun, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. We're all really privileged to have these opportunities, and we should enjoy them as much as possible.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Pauline. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, and I'm sure it's been hugely beneficial for everyone listening. We really, really appreciate it.
I hope as well, and thank you very much, Tilly. It was a great time.
It's a wrap. Sophie, are you still there?
I think we are still